going to start at this side of the classroom and then go to that side of the classroom, and you got to say we and put your hands up, and we're going to do a wave. And if I catch you not saying we and putting your hands up, I'm going to take away your attendance. So just be ready. No standing, all arms, and we. Are we ready? Starting over here on 3. 1, 2, 3, go. Whee! There we go. There we go. Awesome. All right, now we're going back this way. 1, 2, 3, go. Whee! There we go. Oh, Brian had a really good one there. Awesome. All right. Are we ready for lecture 10? There we go. Moderate enthusiasm. I'll take that. I'll take that over the first one. That first one was terrible. Hey, it's Monday. I get it, and I am exhausted too, man. I was camping this weekend, and I feel like I got beaten up by a wild animal and left on the road for dead. So, oh my goodness, it was a circus. But you know, that's what happens when you go camping. There's a lot of work to do. You're running around the whole time. You don't really sleep great. So yeah, it's like being on Survivor, but you don't have the opportunity for like a book deal or a TV show. Yeah, none of that. Everybody's having a good time but you, so that is the job. All right. Thank you, Brian. So lecture 10, as we alluded to, we're going to be learning about rendering. What exactly is rendering? What the heck's going on with that? Basically, rendering is a process where we create the final image. What does our scene look like? What does the movie look like? What is it, you know, how do I make it look the way I want it to look? That's when we get to the rendering process. So what we have to understand is what exactly is going on with a render. Now, rendering, oh, did I not share my screen? All right, I don't want anybody to miss out on that picture of the guy with the Polaroid camera. Yeah, I don't want to have to describe it. I want everybody to see that. Look at that. Right there, rendering, creating an image. And that's basically what's going on in your computer. Your computer is literally drawing a picture for you to see. And that's what that rendering process is. And what's interesting is when you are working inside of Maya's interface, that is a render, believe it or not. It's not a very pretty render. It's a very primitive render, but it is a drawing of what it is you see when you're building stuff. When you look at Maya, Maya is basically a huge calculator. It does a lot of math, and it uses a lot of strings of code to tell it what to do and how things work, because everything is basically a mathematical formula or algorithm to describe basically everything that Maya does. Now, what's really cool is they've taken all this complicated programming and made it into an interface that we can look at and like press buttons rather than have to remember code, you know, and debug code, which I don't know if you've ever done that, but that's definitely a layer of Dante's Inferno. But in terms of we don't have to do coding, we can just press buttons and everything works great. Maya has to draw you a picture to look at so you can see it while you're working on it. Now, this may not seem like such a novel thing for you. Now, why is that exciting? Well, when they first started working in 3D, they didn't even know what they were making. They kind of had to envision it in their heads and figure out the plot points, and they literally had to program each vertice. Let's put a vertice at these coordinates. One vertice, and then they would plug in the code for another vertice, and then let's connect them, you know, edge, you know, and it just took forever to explain how to build something. So, you know, they decided only engineers will create art then. So what we need to do is we need to put an interface on this thing so that the goofy artists can actually play with it too. And they made this really interesting interface where we press buttons, but it's still generating code. And if you take a look at Maya's script editor, you can actually see the code. Let me just show you what I'm talking about in terms of Maya's script editor. If you launch Maya, which I do all the time, and you open up your script editor, you'll see everything is basically programmable code. Everything you do creates a code. So, you know, you create an object, it generates code. So that's what they used to have to do to create art, was make code. But yay, we don't have to do that anymore, thank goodness. I would not be doing this for sure. So now what's great is the computer's got all these buttons that we can press in this beautiful interface that we can look at and interact with, and it's way more fun, in my humble opinion, than coding. But when we're looking at this interface, Maya is drawing for us what we see. And this right here is a render. This is a drawing of what a cube looks like in 3D space. So, and what's even more wild when you realize it is every time I move the camera, Maya is drawing all the little pictures it takes to make that look like it's in motion. So this is literally animation for us. As I am moving my camera around, Maya is drawing as fast as it can to make that cube look bigger as I get nearer to it. The instruction to do so takes place. Does that make sense? Maya is drawing, and it is drawing very, very fast. That's why when you have very complex pieces of geometry on the screen with a lot of faces and everything, you know, when you get up into the hundreds of thousands of faces, Maya's interface will actually chug a little bit. There'll be a bit of a lag sometimes because what you're working with is so dense it can't handle it and it can't draw fast enough. Does that make sense? Because literally, when you are rendering or your computer is rendering, again, you're drawing a picture. And in terms of that picture, boop, where are you? No. Not you. There you go. In terms of that picture, just like it's easy for us to draw a simple picture, I can draw that picture in no time at all because it's very simple. I can draw quickly. But if I'm drawing a more detailed picture, oh, that's actually going to take a lot longer because there's a lot more detail there. Well, when your computer is rendering or drawing pictures for you, it's the same idea. The more complicated the thing you're trying to draw, the longer it takes. That's why we have different kinds of renderers and they give you different looks. So when we're in here and we're looking at Maya and what's going on in here, this is what we call a hardware render because basically it's a very simple renderer. It just gives you some basic shadow and light information to give you the appearance of 3D because that's how we read depth. We look at highlights and we look at shadows, and that tells our brain this sticks in or this sticks out based on that information and our understanding of the universe. So this is, again, a very simple drawing, and that's, again, a hardware render. But there are different kinds of rendering engines, and rendering engines are basically different means of trying to create that final drawing, and they all have their certain different looks, much like watercolor has a look, pastels have a look, oils have a look, charcoal has a look. Your rendering engines can do that kind of thing as well. And some rendering engines are designed to replicate reality as closely as possible. And that's what their job is. And again, depending on the kind of style and the look that you're going for, might choose one rendering engine over another in order to create these final images. So now today we're going to be working with a rendering engine called Arnold. And again, it is part of your Maya package, as we discussed last class, but you do have to turn it on because it's not on by default because it is part of a third-party plugin, meaning that another company made it, but they made it so it would work with Maya like an accessory. So you got to switch that on. So in order to do this rendering activity, you're going to have to do that as well. And again, the process is you go to Windows, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager. And when you go to that, you're going to scroll down, and then you're going to find the MTOA bundle, and that is the M for Maya, TO2A Arnold bundle. And again, if you downloaded Maya using the link we gave you, you got it. It's there. If you got Maya somewhere else, that's when things get complicated. Good news is, if you didn't download with ours first, that's okay. Just download using our link now. You're not going to lose your files. Install that thing, and you will be able to access Arnold, and you'll have no trouble at all. Yep. Windows, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager. Yep, and for the M2TOA bundle. All right, so make sure you've got that all you have to do to make it work is click the loaded button. And if you click auto load, it'll be on all the time, but I can't put that on because I have to demonstrate every class. So then once you hit it, you got it loaded, you hit refresh, and then now Arnold will be an option for you, not only as a menu item here, but when you go to your render settings, it will be accessible there. Now, in terms of your settings, if you go to Windows, Rendering Editors, Render Settings, here's where you would be able to change your rendering engine. Maya by default chooses its software render. Again, there's a hardware render, but once you've activated your copy of or your third-party plugin Arnold, you'll have Arnold down there as a renderer. So you can choose that as well. So you click on that, boop, and then okay, now that I'm using Arnold, you'll see, oh, look, there's all kinds of fun little things to play with in here. And again, when you're using a more artistic, more creative tool, you have more options to work with. And that's what's happening here. We're working with Arnold. It's a better rendering engine than software or hardware. It does more things. And again, it's designed to make things look more realistic in appearance. Now, the rendering engine, just so that you understand, is basically calculating the polygons of your geometry. It's calculating the textures that are on your geometry. It's calculating the lights in the scene. It's calculating how the light strikes the different objects. It's calculating how the light reacts to the objects, you know, translucency, transparency, reflectance. You know, if there's material that has sort of a clear coat on it, how far into that clear coat does that light go penetrating wise before it bounces off and goes a different direction? How does that light fall off as it goes away from that object? Does it carry color information as well, which we call radiosity? So there's a lot of math that goes on. How does light behave, basically, is the answer that you get to that question. And then it creates for us a final image. And again, the reason I likened it to that Polaroid photography, because Polaroid photography is kind of the same idea. You take a picture of somebody, the film comes out, and you wait for a little while. But it's the same idea. We're waiting for the light mixes with the chemicals, it interacts with the silver halide crystals, which drop down into the gelatin, and the silver halide crystals have the different colors in them, and the gelatin, the further into the gelatin the crystals sink, the lighter the color is, and the less deep that it sinks, the darker it is. So we get the lights and the darks in there, which give us a concept of depth. And we have to wait for it while it's developing. Blow on it, gotta shake it. Don't put it upside down. It's got to be right side up. You know, there's all a bunch of voodoo around it. None of that changes anything. But the point is, you have to wait while it's drawing this picture. Well, this works the same way. We have render time. And literally, render time is unavoidable. When you create an image, there's a certain amount of time where you can do nothing but wait for the image to be created. And I like to talk about it as being a prisoner of the render, because literally, you can't do anything else. And to be honest with you, you really don't want to be doing anything else. Your computer should be focused on one thing and one thing only, and that's creating that image. So you don't want to be working on other applications. You don't want to be surfing the web. You don't want to be on social media. You want your computer to do one thing only, and that is create this image, because it will speed that process up. Also, incidentally, when it comes to rendering, make sure your laptop is plugged in, because your laptop actually uses a different graphics card when you're on low power, something that consumes less energy, so the images take longer and they're not as good. So you want to make sure you're plugged in and fully powered when you're rendering. But in terms of that rendering process, again, you can't do anything about it. You just wait. And literally, so important is the rendering phase, because it's the last thing before all of our stuff goes off to compositing, where the wizards of the pipeline try to make it look good. While we're waiting, there's really not else we can do but wait for that thing to be created. And you know, like I said, don't be distracted and do other things. But so important is that rendering process that there are people who that's their job in life. All they do is optimize renders. How can I get this to render faster? That's their whole gig. So for those people, you know, they're just taking a look at what's going on and they're trying to find a way to make it happen faster. Does that make sense? Okay, now The reason I bring that out is because in terms of the rendering process, how long it takes matters. Now, when you play a video game, things have to happen instantly, right? You're playing a video game, you turn down a hallway, right? Zombies! And you light them up. That's what makes video games cool, because if they feel real, because wherever you look in the game, you see something new and different. You feel like you're in there. Well, everything that you see, the computer is drawing for you. And every time you change your view, it's drawing you another picture and all the pictures in between to make it look like it's moving, right? So it has to draw at a certain speed to achieve what we call real time. Does that make sense? Because I know you've probably played a video game where you were trying to do things in real time and it was kind of like lagging or something wasn't working right, and you're like, ugh, and you had to turn off some of the cool functions in order for it to be able to do it at real time. It's because it just couldn't do the math fast enough. Does that make sense? Because it's drawing pictures, basically. So in terms of video games, things have to be drawn in what we call real time. So as a result, that's why we have things like poly limits. You remember when we were talking about how do we count up how many faces are on a polygon object? Well, that's why we did that, because we need to know how many faces this rendering engine can draw at real-time frame rate, because if we go over that number, it doesn't work. Does that make sense? Hell yeah? Okay, good. Now, the difference is when you're watching a movie, movies take a year to come out, so it doesn't matter how long it takes to draw a single frame, and you need 24 of them to make 1 second. So however long it takes one frame, big deal. The movie doesn't open for a year. We got time. Incidentally, did you guys see Transformers? The first one? Yeah, okay. One frame, a 24th of a second of that movie, 40 hours to render. 40 hours for one frame. If you were playing a video game and you turned down a hallway and you had to wait 40 hours for the computer to draw what you saw, probably wouldn't play that game. It's like the worst game ever, right? So point being, render times are a big deal. When we're talking about video games, things like poly count, texture size, that becomes a big deal. So rendering is a huge aspect of what it is we do. And all of our sweat, blood, and tears is towards this rendering process. So it's a big deal. It's important. And that's why we do it too, because I want you to see right away. Because when it comes to modeling, light is either your best friend or your worst enemy. Because if there is anything wrong with the edge flow of your model, if you have poor geometry anywhere, it shows up when the light hits it. So you got to make sure you're doing a good job with your modeling, because this is the final test. You know how good or bad it is depending on how it looks when the light finally hits it and you render that thing out. So point being, the rendering is an important aspect of everything we do. All right, so here we are at rendering, and what I wanted to talk to you about is places where you would, or adjustments you could conceivably be making while rendering. A very important one is, what kind of image do you want to create, right? Or what do you even want to call the image? You know, we could call it Brian. I'll call all my images Brian. And again, what type of image do you want? What are you looking for? What kind of, yeah, TIFFs always. All right. Other important things that you need to know: what camera do you want to render from? Because there are many cameras in Maya, and you can render from a whole host of them. So you know, you got to tell it what camera you want to render from. Tell it exactly which one. Otherwise, Maya will pick one. How big to make that image? Again, there are different size images it could create. Do you plug in the number you want? Again, there's a bunch of stuff in here that are important for you guys. And then you can get into stuff like quality. How good of an image did you do? So there's a lot of variables that go into this rendering process. Does that make sense? Okay, good. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the rendering, and then we're going to actually do a little render so you can kind of see how it goes down. So first things first, because I don't know, that's the way everybody else does it. First things first. We are going to do a practice with our Lecture 10 render activity. So hopefully you download that file. You guys all have it? Good. All right. Let's get that bad boy open. I'm going to set my project to that rendering activity, and mine is on in my documents, I think it's in there. No, that's not where it is. It's in my new lecture 10, render activity. There it is. So there's mine. I'm going to set it. And then file open scene. And because I've set my project, it goes, oh yeah, well, which one of the files do you want? The only one in there. Big guy. Open it up. And what you will see is I've got a scene in here with a couple of different cameras, but you'll notice that there's an extra one in here called Render Cam. Now, the thing about Maya is we have a bunch of cameras in Maya, and they all do different things, but those are working cameras. Those are our eyes as we are working and doing our job and building stuff and creating, whatever it is we've imagined. But we can also make cameras that we sort of film through. And that's what I like to do, is create a brand new camera for just filming, so that I can set up that camera exactly the way I want to, and then I can mess with whatever I want. I don't have to worry about hitting the camera. I don't know, have any of you guys ever made a video or a film or anything like that? And you're like, did you hit the camera? You moved the camera, damn it. So this is a great way you can set up a camera, and then you don't have to worry about, did you bump it, did you move it, is it in the place it was in before, that kind of thing. So we've got this render camera that we've created, and you can make a new camera anytime you want to. If you go to any menu set within the panel, if you go to Panels, Perspective, New, you can make a brand new perspective camera and call it whatever you want, just like geometry. So you can make a render cam anytime you wish. Now, in terms of these other cameras, of course, these guys are all working cameras that allow you to move around and do the things that we do. But what I want to do is draw attention to the render cam. Now, in terms of our render cam, let me see if I can fit all of this on the screen. It's such a joy to work with this resolution. There we go. Something that you'll notice is the fact that I've got this gray area out here. And that gray area is letting you know what is in and out of shot, as it were. And I'm pretty sure some of you guys have taken pictures where you had a camera that had sort of etchings on the glass that told you, what's within frame and outside of frame. And that's basically what's going on here. Is I've got a film gate on and a resolution gate, and these are basically saying that based on the resolution that is plugged in for my camera, what is clear or what you can see, that's actually going to be in the shot. Anything in this gray area here, you're not going to see that. So you can literally line up the camera just like you would line up any camera to take a picture. Okay, and if it was a moving camera, if we were making a movie, we would just take a whole bunch of pictures. Same thing. Now, in terms of the camera, something you'll notice right away is I can't move it. That's because the camera is locked. We lock the camera, because I often get the question, can we lock things in Maya? Is that possible? Absolutely. So how do I unlock this camera? Well, these are the steps. First, you go to the panel menu View of the camera that's locked. You go to View and choose Select Camera. When you select the camera, you'll see that it loads the camera in the channel box. You see it says Render Cam up there. And you'll notice when you look at the attributes for the render camera that there's like this gray stripe down the side over here. And that's an indication that these attributes are locked, and therefore you can't move the camera. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight these attributes with the left mouse button, and I'm selecting the words, you'll note, not the numbers. I'm selecting the words over here. And then if I hold down my right mouse button while they're selected, this huge rectangular menu set pops up. And one of the things that's in there is Unlock Selected. And this is what's going to allow us to unlock our camera. And then you'll notice that the gray stuff goes away, right? Except for these guys right here, I didn't unlock those. Unlock. And of course, lock is right under that as well. So you can, that's how you lock things. But once that's unlocked, now all of a sudden, oh yeah, look at that. Now I can move. All right. Now the good news is we've given you an object already. There's the Peppermill, your buddy, is in there already on the desk. And basically this room, it was actually built by a couple of guys in the finals department. They made it for me. It's so sweet of them. But here's a room, and there's already lights in there. You don't even have to put those in there. In fact, the guy who teaches the lighting class put these lights in here for you, just to give you a nice little lighting setup. And you can kind of see how this all goes down. So now based on these lights, I've got this interesting little scene going. So now it's true, composition is critically important when you're creating these images, but we're going to talk about that next class. But for this class, I just want to see that you can do the process. So what I want you to do is try to move your camera around to some position to make this look kind of interesting. And you can put it wherever you want. Again, this is just, I want to see that you can render. So I don't want you to feel pressure to create the greatest render ever, but that would help. So set up your camera wherever you like. Does that make sense? Okay. And then let's do a test render. So the rendering process goes down like this. We're going to go to Windows, Rendering Editors, Render View. And the render viewer is basically a little window that basically shows us what does our image look like, the final image, and we can kind of tinker with it and mess with it until we get exactly what we want. Now, in terms of this window, what you will notice is that there's some icons in here, and it's got its own little menu set, just like many other windows in Maya. And the very first icon here is Render Current Frame. Now, this icon, right, it basically looks like a film slate, you know, the marker they do at the beginning of shot. Chickens on fire, take one, and then they roll camera. So that little film slate, what I want to point out to you is on the main interface of Maya, you also have one of those right here, Render Current Frame. Many, many times, the Render Current Frame in the viewer doesn't render the right camera. Does that make sense? Despite the fact that I tell it exactly what camera to render from, because I can go to Window, Rendering Editors, Render Settings, and I can scroll down to Renderable Camera, which is what camera do I want you to do a render from, and I can choose the render cam from the drop down. So Maya should know exactly what camera I want to render from, right? Take a close look at this view and watch what happens. A good percentage of the time when I click the Render Current View, Maya renders, oh, something else, a different view, because you can see right there, that's not that shot right there. Does that make sense? Okay, so I almost exclusively use this Render Current Frame icon for this very reason. Does that make sense? Okay, so you can see here it's rendering the wrong thing, and if it's rendering, again, you don't want it to be doing anything else, but it kind of locks a little bit. There's not a whole lot else you can do in Maya. So if you hit render and all of a sudden you realize, oh shoot, it's rendering the wrong thing, something that you can do to stop it is if you look on your keyboard in the upper left-hand corner, the escape key, if you hit escape, that will kill the render. And that is kind of the only way to break that cycle, because otherwise you're stuck waiting for it to finish. And this isn't a big deal because that render was kind of short. That was like about 1.5 minutes at most. But if you're doing a render that's 40 hours and you realize you got the wrong thing rendering, you want that thing to stop long before 40 hours. So escape is your buddy. But what I did want to show you is while it's rendering, again, the process is it starts in the middle, which I'm actually very excited about that they changed that. And it renders and it just kind of goes around and around and around, and it's basically sampling light, sampling materials. It's looking at the polygons, it's looking for textures, it's looking at the light and the behavior of the light, and it's trying to figure out, well, what does this scene actually look like? And it creates this final image. Now, by no means is this image saved at all. I just kind of created this image. If I want to keep it, that's a whole other animal. We'll get to that in just a second. But what I want to show you is this does not mean I'm done now. I can save this. That's not going to work. I have to actually try to save the image. But point is, it's not rendering from the correct view. So what do? I use the render current frame on this particular frame and I render. All right, so here we go again. And then you start to see, oh, that's looking better. That looks like more of what I had set up originally. Right, I can see the fall off here. I got a nice crisp highlight there. I'm getting some nice lighting through here, some pretty decent shadows. Looks like that desk lamp is hitting this pretty hard right here. And this is light from the window because I'm seeing this little crossbars from the window on that part. All right, I'm waiting. And my render should be done very shortly. Boop. And we get all kinds of good information once that thing stops. We get the resolution, the size of that image that we've created. I know what frame number it is. It happens to be frame number 95, but this is a still image. It could be frame number 1 or frame 427 billion. But if I was doing a sequence of images because it was going to be animated and I had, 24 frames a second and I had 2 seconds of animation, it could be frame 72, or no, 2 seconds, that wouldn't work. It could be 32. But point being, the frame number that actually is in there. But the thing that really helps us the most is render time. And you can see I'm at 53 seconds here. So each time I render an image, I can see how long they're taking. And as I make adjustments, as I make changes, as I add detail, that kind of thing, my render time will go up. So you have to be very cognizant of that render time, because if my assignment is due in 20 minutes and my render time is 30 minutes, I can't get that done in time. Does that make sense? Not going to happen. Unless you're the Flash and you can run through time. But then you have the possibility of incurring a time race, which apparently they're not very happy about that kind of thing. And, all kinds of mayhem ensues from that. And they're kind of scary, to be honest with you. Yes. You have a question about the Flash? No. Okay. No, you don't have to move the camera. If let's say, for example, we're not doing an animation, but let's say you're the camera and I'm in a shot where I'm dancing. So the camera's stationary, I'm moving, but you're just taking a lot of pictures of me. Because if you look at animation, basically what it is like a flip book. It's a series of images moving at the right rate of speed. And due to persistence of vision, we perceive animation or motion. What do you mean dynamic? Oh yeah, if you're moving the camera while I'm moving, yeah, you're gonna have to animate the camera and you'll put keyframes in there. Yep, yeah, it's just like keyframing an object to move, same thing. So if you've got camera movement in there, changing the focus, changing the lens, whatever, yeah, you're gonna have to animate that stuff, absolutely. All right, so again, render time, can't do anything about that. So you have to be very cognizant of what that time is, because you do have to turn this stuff in on time. So I'm looking at this image and I go, okay, that's pretty good for my first render. So here's where I'm going to use some other cool little buttons in my render viewer. I call this button hang on to a frame, and I call that button lose a frame. Now, the reason I call it that is because Maya calls it like save a frame or something ridiculous like that, but it's not really saving it. It's a bit of a misnomer. Keep image, because it doesn't really, that's not saving. It's just hanging on to it for you. And the reason it's doing that is so you can do a comparison. So just to show you, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this image, and all you have to do is click that little icon there, and it hangs on to it for you. And then you can do another render. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to change the position of this object so you can kind of see how this changes. I'm going to move this object over here now, and I'm going to do another render. So now Maya is going to get to work, and approximately 53 seconds from now, I will have another version of what I just rendered, but the object should be in a slightly different location because I moved it. Now it might be a little bit more than 53 seconds because I brought it closer to camera, so it's going to probably give it more scrutiny to do a better job. But here it comes. It's coming along any day now. Oh, thank you. All right. So yeah, 56 seconds this time. All right. Now you can see I've got this image, and then what I can do is at the bottom of my viewer, which I will have to make it so you can see it again. I don't know why my frame keeps changing size when I hit the render button, but you can see I've got this slider down here, and what I can do is slide back and forth between the two images and see what my adjustment was. Does that make sense? And you can start to see that looks like it's moving. It's just because it's two images with an object in a different position. I perceive motion, not really moving. Does that make sense? Okay, so that little hang on to it button is great because you can make adjustments to quality, you can move your lights around, there's all kinds of stuff you can play with and, oh, you know, that looks better. No, I liked it better before, you know, and this is how you make adjustments. That's sort of the workflow to lighting and rendering. Now the good news is you don't have to move the lights, you don't have to play with any of that, but you may want to play with the object's placement. Does that make sense? And of course quality. We're going to talk about how to do that as well. So again, based on what you're seeing, you can continue to make adjustments. Now, I like the fact that my object is more in the light now, but I don't really like that little stripe on there. So what I'm going to try to do is bring my object maybe to the right a little bit if I can, to bring it more into the light, to make it more obvious that this is kind of the star of my show. So I'm going to hang on to this image right here, and I'm going to take my object and see if I can truck it over this way a little bit. And I'm going to show you another fun little thing. Now, it takes 56 seconds to render this current frame, right? But I'm pretty happy with everything else. I really just want to know what this part looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use this icon here, which is render selection. And what I'm going to do is draw a little box with my left mouse button to select this area. And I just let go after I draw it. Drag with the left mouse button. And then I can click this icon here and it will render just what's inside that box, which is going to take way less than 56 seconds. So it's going to be, I don't have to wait as long because really I'm not concerned with the other aspects of the scene. I just want to see the part that I'm worried about right now, and that's where's my pepper shaker in all this. Does that make sense? So again, that's a nice time saver. Now you can see, you know, that only took 17 seconds. So I can look at that and go, you know what? That looks better. I like it. Let's do the whole thing and see. How's that look? So then I'm going to click out here. My viewer will get huge again. And it won't let me adjust it now. But do you see the ideas that are happening here? These are all thought processes to rendering. And it's all about efficiency. We model with efficiency, we light with efficiency, we render with efficiency. Everything we try to do, we're trying to cut down the render time. And that's all part of that efficiency process. So if everybody does their job the most efficient way they can, when we finally get to rendering, we're doing the best we could have at our end to help out the person who's doing the rendering. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's how that stuff all connects to each other. We're just a team of people trying to make something cool, and it takes everybody doing their best to do it. So You got to be thinking about everybody else. All right, so here I am at 54 seconds, and you know, that's looking pretty good. I'm all right with that. Decent framing, not bad. I'd kind of like to see some of the top of that thing. I might have to swing it around a little bit, or maybe tuck it a little bit in that direction also to bring that out of the shadow. That might be the top of the window. But point being, I'm moving the camera around. I'm trying to see how it looks, and then I can start looking at things like quality control. How do I make it look better in terms of that rendered image? And when I say better, what I'm saying is when you look into the shadow areas, do they look like clean, smooth shadows, or are they kind of rough and grainy and specular? You know, does the image not look as good as it could? And granted, it's a black and white because, you know, we don't have any textures on there or anything, but how's it looking, you know? And we can actually play with the quality. How's everybody doing with this part? Are we all able to render an image? Everybody good? Anybody having trouble with that? Again, yes. I'm sorry? Okay, all right. No, we'll take a look. Yes. With my left mouse button, I just drew a box around the area I wanted to render, and just to the right of the icon that's render current frame is render current field. That's the one you want to click. Yep, no worries. Let me take a quick look and see where you're at. Hang on 1 second, let me see where you are. Okay, do you have the Arnold renderer on? Go to Windows. Rendering editor. I mean, render settings. Yeah, rendering editor, rendering editor, render settings. Yep, you have Arnold on, that's good. All right, so close that. Click that icon right there. There you go. Yes. Right, and are you using this icon over here, or are you using the one there?
Which one?
That's, yeah, that one is the one that renders the wrong one. That one renders the right. Yeah. Yes, go to the left one, that one. Yep, that's what I was saying. For some reason, even if you have the correct camera selected in your render settings, it renders the wrong one. And I don't understand why it does that. But there are a couple of windows in Maya where sort of the external floating ones don't work as well as the main interface one. And I don't know what that is, but if the same icon is on the main interface, I'm going to use that one because I have a much higher level of success with that. All right. We doing okay, everybody? How about my digital friends? How are you guys doing? Let me take a quick look and see. Good, good. Okay, cool. Oh no, why did Rebecca have to go? Rebecca, don't leave. If you leave me now, you take away the best part of me. Woo! I can't even do the high part. Actually, I couldn't do any of that, but the high part's even worse. All right, well, I guess we'll have to catch Rebecca next time. Catherine, everything was going a little too fast for me to completely absorb and watch the recording. Well, and that's good. I'm really glad that we do the recordings, because if it seems to be going a little bit fast, you can always watch the recording. But I do recommend very highly trying to write things down as I'm talking, not necessarily do everything all at once, because there's typically many, many steps. So whenever I go, okay, and then these are the steps, and then you kind of have to jot those things down. Parts of this class are follow along, but most of them are not. So, but again, the good news is we record this stuff, so you can watch it as many times as you need to. But even then, I highly recommend while you're watching the video to take notes while you're watching it, because probably one of the most difficult ways to learn is to hit play, do what I'm doing, or hit play, stop, do what I did, play, do what I did, stop. You know, it's like all you're doing is basically mimicking, and you know that can sometimes get you through the process, but you don't remember any of it. You were just executing based on instruction at that juncture in time, and you don't understand how it works in the grand scheme of things anyway. So again, even if you're watching these videos, I cannot stress enough, write stuff down while you're watching. It makes a huge difference in terms of not only understanding but retention. So, and that's big because you gotta remember this stuff. It all builds on each other. So that's definitely a very important aspect of learning this material. All right, so we got that render going, and it seems like everybody's pretty good on this so far. So let's take a quick look at some ideas of quality. So let's just say I'm pleased as punch with this image. I'm really excited. Let's start looking at some quality. So if I go to Windows, Rendering Editors, Render Settings, I go back into here, and you'll see on the second tab, the Arnold Renderer, there's a little something called Camera AA, and this is basically like anti-aliasing. It's a quality control, and you'll see it's set at 3 by default. You know, what does 3 mean? You know, millibars, milligrams, whatever. It's on a scale of some variety, and 3 is pretty low apparently, because if I look at the slider, that's in like the first third. So in terms of what does that mean? Not so much to me. But what it tells me is if my quality is not good enough, then I need to increase that. Now, I know I've said this before, but in Maya, it is always a good idea to work in halves and doubles, because that way you can remember where you just were. So for example, I'm at 3 and I say, you know, that looks pretty good, but I think it could be better. Well, then my next adjustment will be to go to 6. Does that make sense? Because if it's set to 6 and I look at it and I go, wow, that's still not even close, then I'm going to go to 12. Does that make sense? If I go to 12 and I go, nope, that wasn't the answer, I think the previous one was the right one, then I know what it was because it's half of what it is now. Does that make sense? Because Maya doesn't remember. If you hit undo, it's not going to go, oh yes, prior to this you had it set to 6. Maya doesn't remember any of that because it's a number you plugged in. So halves and doubles will get you to where you want to go. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm currently set for 3. I want to see how much better I can make it look, so I'm going to change it to 6, which is double. So now that I've got that set in there, let's see what happens. Now I'm going to do another render. I want to make sure I have a copy of this one, so I click the hang on to it button. And then I come over here and I render another image, and my screen gets huge again. Now, as I am asking for more scrutiny, as I am asking for more quality, as I am asking for better lighting, do you think this drawing will take more time or less time? More time, definitely, because I'm asking for better quality. Anytime you ask for quality, it's going to cost you something, and that's usually time. So now it's going to be a little bit longer to create this render. And this is a very simple render. This is a very light room. There's not much in here. There's only a few lights in here. There's not very much polygon geometry. There's no animation, hardly any texture whatsoever. Really, this is pretty minimal. And you can see this is taking, you know, a minute, minute and a half. So you can see how fast things get real complicated from here. Things can take a lot longer. Oh yeah, is your fan turning on? Yeah, right now your processor is working harder and faster than it ever has, and as a result, it's generating heat. And when you hear about people saying that they fried their computer, a lot of times what they're talking about is just this. They overclocked it, it gets too hot from doing some math so fast, It literally burns it. It catches on fire. So right now, the little fan inside your laptop is turning on and trying to cool down your processor. And so it starts to sound like a jet plane taking off. What's that? That's an excellent question. What I like to do is I will set my laptop up on books. I'll put 2 books under it so that there's a space in between that allows airflow. And what you don't want to do is leave your laptop like on a rug floor or on your couch or something, because not enough air is getting in there, and that will make it even. Yeah, don't leave it in your car while you're at the beach. Bad idea. Very bad idea. Don't take it swimming with you. But yeah, they can get hot, you know, so that's all right. The computers had it easy up to now. Work for a change. Slacker. So yeah, now it's actually doing its job. Yeah, and you want to make sure you're plugged in, and again, unplug everything else. You know, don't just disconnect yourself from the internet. You really don't want to be doing anything but rendering, because that whatever else you're making your processor do, that's taken away resources from this, which means it will take longer. Yeah, this is a bad time to go on the web and look for videos of people hurting themselves. Those are funny, but wait till your render's done. Or use your roommate's computer. Render on yours and use theirs for something else. Speaking of which, that's why they have things called render farms. You know, it's like a lot of people can get together and do something more quickly than one person can do it. The same thing with rendering. They can connect a whole bunch of computers together, and they form what they call a render farm. And a farm will render way faster than a single unit. And that's how they render for movies and stuff. They get a bunch of machines and time together, and they can render much more quickly that way. So you can see now I'm at 3 minutes and 32 seconds, and all I did was double my quality. That's it, from 3 to 6, and I've more than doubled my time. Does that make sense? So you can start to see. So now here's where I'm going to go, okay, let's see how we did. Here's my current render. Let me compare it to my previous one. And I can work this slider and just look at it. And in terms of where do I look, I'm going to be looking in shadow areas. I'm going to be looking where light kisses the surface of the geometry. And I just want to see, does it look any better? Is it noticeably better with one setting over the other? And in some instances, when you flip it back and forth, you go, you know what? It doesn't matter at all. It's just as good. So why not render it at the lower setting and have it happen faster? And that really comes into play if you're rendering more than one frame. Does that make sense? I've already got this one, so I can keep it if I want. But if I'm rendering, you know, 350 frames, and it's taking me 3 minutes and 32 seconds per frame, and I can get the same quality, and I can get it in 1 minute and 32 seconds a frame, that's a big difference in my world. Does that make sense? So you got to be smart about this rendering thing so that you literally don't paint yourself into a corner and you can't get it done on time. Now, once you've got that image and you're pretty happy with it and you're excited, well, here's when we talk about how do we save an image. So in terms of saving an image, what you want to do is in your render viewer, go to File, Save Image. And then it's going to ask you again, what type do you want it to be? And there are many types to choose from. You've got to scroll. They're alphabetical, so you can find the one you want. For our class, we use TIFFs. So be sure you select a TIFF image type. It's alphabetical, so T's near the bottom. You're going to have to scroll. And of course, this is where you would render it. And you can see it's going to the images folder of my render activity. And I'm going to call it, I'm going to give it the naming convention for the class. Gold underscore Steve underscore final render. I hate this keyboard. 1808. And then when you hit save, that will put that image into your images folder. So if you go to your little folder here, open it up. And I'm going to go to my lecture 10 skill check. And I'm going to go to my images. Oh, where did it go? Is that where it went? File, save image, lecture 10, lecture 10. Oh, it went to my images folder. Yeah, that's where I'm at. No, that's not where I see it. You know what? I'm going to save it to my desktop just to be sure. Oh, no, there it is. That's weird. It says it's there.
I saw when you were looking.
I'm in my images. Oh, maybe it's this one. I looked in the wrong one. I have more than one. Well, that'll do it. So there's my images. And I open it up, and there's my final image. Again, showing off my geometry, trying to make it look cool. Because for your week 4 assignment 2, that's exactly what you're going to be doing. You're going to be picking out 4 objects that you built this month, 4 objects that you turned in for one of your weekly turn-ins. So it can't be a block out, it can't be the jar. That wasn't a turn-in, that was a skill check. So not the snowman and nothing you built for fun. Look at, yeah, no zombie buses. Yeah, no, look at this cool model I made of Yoda's foot. Yeah, no, it's got to be one of the assets we asked you to build for a weekly turn-in. So a level 1, level 2, or level 3 asset. You're going to get 4 of those. It has to be 4 different ones, not 4 beer bottles. It's got to be 4 different ones. And what you're going to do is set them up within this scene, because for that week 4 assignment 2, it's the same scene, just the Peppermill's not in it. So you're going to take those objects that you built and put them in there. And again, the idea is the desk is kind of like a stage, and that's where you can show off the stuff that you built. So you take your 4 objects, you put them in there, you arrange them in such a way to make it look interesting. And we're going to talk about that on Wednesday's class. How do I make it look interesting? And then you'll do a render just like we did now. So if you were able to do this activity, you should be able to do that one, because it's almost identical. You're just going to be bringing in the stuff that you made, not working with the stuff that we made. Does that make sense? 4 things, any 4, you built them, and they have to be level 1, level 2, or level 3 assets, not anything else. Does that make sense? Yes.
For certain assets, do we have to add any textures to them? Like
No, not at all. Now, if you wanted to, could you create an AO pass and plug that in? Absolutely. I would love it.
Yeah, I'm more thinking like if I were to say at the gumball machine, do I have to put the glass for the glassy texture?
No, if you wanted to though, you could. You could make that material transparent so light goes through it, sure, but you don't have to. But that AO pass does look really cool on there, and that's not that hard to do. It does require that you UV the objects in order to create the AO pass, but if you have the time, that will look nicer. Yes. Yep, you've got one shot to get these 4 objects. And again, we're going to talk about composition. How do I make my stuff look pretty? Because that's really important. I think that's often overlooked. Look at this cool thing I made, but you're not really showing it off very well. So what we're going to talk about is composition and making a nice image. That's next class. But for right now, I just want to make sure that you guys can render, you get the ideas, and you understand the gist of week 4 assignment 2. Because week 4 comes up really fast. You know, week 3 is due tonight, and week 4 is like due like the next night. Well, no, it's not that bad, but it's pretty close. So, but the good news is week 4 assignments are not as challenging. Like you can see, I mean, how long did this take? I mean, we did this together, and that was the first time you ever did it. So this is not that complicated. The other assignment is you're going to be UV mapping some objects that you've modeled. But again, you've got to do that for this turn-in as well. So there's not anything new under the sun. So week 4, although there is less time to do the work, it's work you've done before or work that doesn't take that much time. And that is definitely on purpose because I know you're limited. But point being, you don't have to create textures for anything if you don't want to. But if you did have to create a texture because you're like, I want a texture more than anything, by all means create an AO pass for the stuff that you've modeled, because that's not that hard. And since you have to UV 2 objects for your week 3 turn in as a test to see how well you do, and then we want you to UV 2 things for your week 4 assignment 1, those are 4 things UV'd right there. So
for the 1 week 4 turn, you need 2 more objects than these 2, and then insert the 2 we used last week.
You have to UV new stuff.
Yeah.
Yes, you must UV new stuff because you don't really learn anything by turning in the same thing you turned in before. It's probably going to get the same grade. Odds are very high. So you always want to make new stuff whenever and wherever you can, and you always want to do a process again. Repetition is a cornerstone of learning. That's why we try to have you guys do it as many different times as we can, because when you guys get to model creation, and we're going to talk about that on Wednesday too, the expectations are considerably higher. The skills are the same, but the expectations are higher. So it's important you have all the skills you need to be successful in there, because these 2 classes are basically linked together. 3DF leads to MCR, which leads to your first portfolio class. And I don't know how familiar you guys are with the way the classes work, but it's like, here's 3DF, here's model creation. Okay, now you go to portfolio class. And portfolio class is not necessarily a teaching class. They'll show you a little bit of stuff, but it's really more of, okay, now you know how to model, now make some stuff and make some really good stuff. And that's it. It's on you to execute. Does that make sense? You got to show off your skills. So if you're not picked up what you need to from 3DF and MCR, you are going to be floundering big time in there. Does that make sense? You will be without training wheels in there. So you really got to make it happen. So it's really important you understand the stuff we're talking about in here and work hard at it, because you will be tested on it soon. Because this was a month. Did that feel like a month? No, the last class is Wednesday and we're done. Months go by very fast in here. So be aware. Will model creation go fast? Yes. Will portfolio be here before you know it? Definitely. Does that make sense? So you got to buckle up and be ready. Yes, mostly Maya. You will have had some ZBrush experience because model creation, they go into it a little bit. We'll talk about that on Wednesday, but it's mostly Maya. So yeah, you got to be creating some really highly detailed stuff in there. Nuke is a compositing software. That's not 3D modeling. Yeah, but that's basically we're creating images and then you bring them into Nuke, and then that's where you're making really cool stuff with it. It's compositing, and don't they do like particle stuff in there as well? It's just compositing. Okay, I didn't know if there was any simulations. Oh, tracking is what it does also. Okay, so if you've got shots that move and you're trying to match live action with CG stuff and make it track together with a moving camera. But yeah, it's mostly compositing. So again, we create images which then go to the compositing phase, and that's where they make everything agree lighting wise. They add effects like laser bolts and lightsabers and all that cool stuff, crazy transitions, like all that stuff happens in compositing. That's why they call those guys like the wizards of the pipeline, because they get all this stuff from everybody, and then it's their job to put it together and make it look good. It's a hard gig with a lot of pressure, because usually everybody takes longer than they're supposed to. but you've only got this much time. So if everybody takes a little bit too long, you just have less time to work with. It's a high pressure gig. Does that make sense in terms of what we're doing? Week 4 assignment 2 is what this looks like. Okay, so again, not that time consuming, but obviously if you don't have the steps, it's frustrating. So, you know, and again, if you need to, watch the recording of this, but I do recommend, even if you're watching the recording, take notes. It really helps with the retention. Even if you never look at your notebook again, just the fact that you were writing while you were listening and watching, it helps you remember it better. It's amazing how that works. But yeah, make sure you are prepared and ready to rock and roll, because it all comes down quick. Now, you might be wondering, okay, so what's the skill check for today? And today's skill check is basically a culmination of what we learned how to do last class and what we learned how to do this class. So we know how to create an AO pass, right, for an object, because you will have done that for your pepper mill. So what we're going to do is use that AO pass that you created for your pepper mill, bring it into this scene and render an image with that same texture, because it's the same pepper mill. So the UVs are the same. You can plug the same texture map into this file and it will work. Does that make sense? Same object, same UVs, it will match. But what you do have to do is make sure you set your project to the render 10 activity, and then you have to put that EXR file, that AO pass texture that it creates, the image, it's got to go into the source images folder, and you've got to plug it into the color channel of the material. Does that make sense? Again, these are all things we've done before, so you know how to do them, and that's why we did it again and again and again, so that you get it. And that's got to be turned in, yeah. So make sure you give us the Maya file as well as the EXR file. I want to see that, and a render of it. Yep. So you can actually bring these two concepts together, and then again, if you wanted to, that's the most you could go for with your week 4 assignment too. Let's put an AO pass on the models and let's render it. It's not that bad. I try to give you guys a big breadcrumb trail that takes you from one to the next, so it's not too bad. All right. Any questions about today's skill check? Good.
Could you repeat that last part? Sorry, I had a hard time. About what we're supposed to turn in, like what files we're supposed to turn in.
Oh, we're going to need the Maya file. I'm going to need the AO pass texture, and I want the render. I want to see the render with. Does that make sense? Because otherwise, I can't see what you did all the work for if you don't show me the render. So I don't want just the Maya file. So make sure you turn in all the things I need. Any other questions? No? Okay, good. Again, it's pretty straightforward. Get to work. Your week 4 or week 3 assignment is due this evening, so you got to get it done. And again, it's level 3 assets, which means you've got to create a project folder. You got to bring your source images into the source images folder. You've got to line up those images yourself, and then you can start modeling. So all the stuff we've done for you in the past is on you now. So make sure you do that. Look very closely at the self-grade document. Make sure you select week 3 from the tab so you can double check it, and make sure you understand exactly what we're looking for, because week 3 we're asking for more stuff as always. You know, delete history, freeze transformations, make sure you've got good edge quality on your models. Look at what we're asking for. You don't want to miss anything silly, because it's a decent amount of points. You don't want to don't miss points on easy stuff. Miss points on the hard stuff. All right? Take it easy, guys. Good lecture. Thank you very much. Thank you, my digital friends. And I will catch you guys all on Wednesday for the last lecture. No tears, though. We'll get together one more time, and then I will catch you later. Thank you very much. Oh, man, that looks wild. It almost looks like you tried, you know, to make it look like that.
I saved it. It looked good.
Yeah.
2 hours later, it just opened it up.
You know what it looks like? It's like a Russian spy satellite.